And we're live! Did everybody miss me? There's nobody here. Now somebody's here! Let's see who else is gonna show up. Hi! I'm waiting to see if anybody else is gonna show up, or if it's just gonna be us tonight. Because not only do I have Harry Potter, but, you know, yesterday was Mother's Day. And most kids, you know, make things for their moms for Mother's Day while they're in school. Well, we don't have school right now because of this whole COVID, quarantine, blah, blah, blah. So Damon made me something at Grandma's house. Now, this card is hilarious and I love it. So, this says Mother's Day with me on a broomstick. You are too here, Emma. I see you. Inside the card, it says, "You are the best mom and witch ever." With a hissing cat. It says hiss. And on the other side, it says, "My mom is the best mom because she is my mom." So that's right, guys. I am the best mom because I'm his mom. All you other moms with an owl. But the hissing cat got me, and the fact that I look like Harry Potter on a broomstick is hilarious, because Damon likes the fact that I've been reading live. Now, he doesn't listen because he's heard me read these books many times, but this was great. This was my Mother's Day card, as well as some other choice jewelry and things. But the card got me. It's the little things in life we cherish, that we hang on to. Don't ever, ever throw away any Mother's Day presents. I have all of my Mother's Day presents from the years. I've got 12 years worth of Mother's Day presents. It's insane. More, actually less than 12 years worth, but whatever. Anyway, I wanted to share that with everybody because I thought it was absolutely great, and it has to do with our Harry Potter theme. So I am the best witch ever, and the best mom ever, according to my child. He did, Emma. He put so much thought into it. I thought it was great. I was laughing. I was crying. I was like, this is wonderful. I'm keeping it. I had to share it live. It's great. I love kids. I love my kid. That's not true. I don't love all children. I love my child. I do like kids, though. Probably because I'm about the same size as them. Anyway, are we ready for the next chapters in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban? Hello, Angela. We are reading Harry Potter. That's what I go live for every night. Okay, we are on chapter 12. My goodness, I need to order the 4th book illustrated. We're almost done with this one. All right, chapter 12, the Patronus. There's some lizards and stuff in the background. All right. And I need a drink of water. So, Harry knew that Hermione had meant well, but that didn't stop him from being angry with her. He had been the owner of the best broom in the world for a few short hours, and now, because of her interference, he didn't know whether he would ever see it again. He was positive that there was nothing wrong with the firebolt now, but what sort of state would it be in once it had been subjected to all sorts of anti-jinx tests? Ron was furious with Hermione, too. As far as he was concerned, the stripping down of a brand new firebolt was nothing less than criminal damage. Hermione, who remained convinced that she had acted for the best, started avoiding the common room. Harry and Ron supposed that she had taken refuge in the library and didn't try to persuade her to come back. All in all, they were glad when the rest of the school returned shortly after New Year and Gryffindor Tower became crowded and noisy again. Wood sought Harry out on the night before term started. "Had a good Christmas?" he said. And then, without waiting for an answer, he sat down, lowered his voice, and said, "I've been doing some thinking over Christmas, Harry. After the last match, you know. If the Dementors come to the next one, we can't afford you to, well..." Wood broke off, looking awkward. "I'm working on it," said Harry quickly. "Professor Lupin said he'd trade me to ward the Dementors off. We should be starting this week. He said he'd have time after Christmas." "Ah," said Wood, his expression clearing. "Well, in that case, I don't really want to lose you as a seeker, Harry. Have you ordered a new broom yet?" "No," said Harry. "What? You'd better get a move on, you know. You can't ride that shooting star against Ravenclaw." "You got a firebolt for Christmas," said Ron. "A firebolt? No, seriously? A real firebolt?" "Don't get excited, Oliver," said Harry gloomily. "I haven't got it anymore. It was confiscated." And he explained all about how the firebolt was now being checked for jinxes. "Jinxes? How could it be jinxed?" "Sirius Black," Harry said wearily. "He's supposed to be after me, so McGonagall reckons he might have sent it." Waving aside the information that a famous murderer was after his seeker, Wood said, "But Black couldn't have bought a firebolt. He's on the run. The whole country's on the lookout for him. How could he just walk into Quality Quidditch Supplies and buy a broomstick?" "I know," said Harry, "but McGonagall still wants to strip it down." Wood went pale. "I'll go and talk to her, Harry," he promised. "I'll make her see reason. A firebolt? A real firebolt? On our team? She wants Gryffindor to win as much as we do. I'll make her see sense." Firebolt! Lessons started again the next day. The last thing anyone felt like doing was spending 2 hours in the grounds on a raw January morning, but Hagrid had provided a bonfire full of salamanders for their enjoyment. That sounds really mean. Isn't my hair Harry Pottery enough right now? Oh, wait, hang on. I am dressed for the occasion. I'm wearing Gryffindor pants. See, Brandon, I am dressed. All right. Okay, so Hagrid provided a bonfire full of salamanders for their enjoyment, and they spent an unusually good lesson collecting dry wood and leaves to keep the fire blazing, while the flame-loving lizards scampered up and down the crumbling white-hot logs. The first divinations lesson of the new term was much less fun. Professor Trelawney was now teaching them palmistry, and she lost no time in informing Harry that he had the shortest lifelines she had ever seen. It was defense against the dark arts that Harry was keen to get to. After his conversation with Wood, he wanted to get started on his anti-Dementor lessons as soon as possible. "Ah, yes," said Lupin, when Harry reminded him of his promise at the end of class. "Let me see. How about 8 o'clock on Thursday evening? The History of Magic classroom should be large enough. I'll have to think carefully about how we're going to do this. We can't bring a real Dementor into the castle to practice on." "Still looks ill, doesn't he?" said Ron, as they walked down the corridor, heading to dinner. "What do you reckon is the matter with him?" There was a loud and impatient tut from behind them. It was Hermione, who had been sitting at the foot of a suit of armor, repacking her bag, which was so full of books it wouldn't close. I'm glad I got an A. Thank you, Brandon. "And what are you tutting for?" said Ron irritably. "Nothing," said Hermione in a lofty voice, heaving her bag back over her shoulder. "Yes, you were," said Ron. "I said I wonder what's wrong with Lupin, and you—" "Well, isn't it obvious?" said Hermione, who was with a look of maddening superiority. "Well, if you don't want to tell us, don't," snapped Ron. "Fine," said Hermione haughtily, and she marched off. "She doesn't know," said Ron, staring resentfully after Hermione. "She's just trying to get us to talk to her again." At 8 o'clock on Thursday evening, Harry left Gryffindor Tower for the History of Magic classroom. It was dark and empty when he arrived, but he lit the lamps with his wand and had waited only 5 minutes before Professor Lupin turned up, carrying a large packing case, which he heaved onto Professor Binns' desk. "What's that?" said Harry. "Another boggart," said Lupin, stripping off his cloak. "I've been combing the castle ever since Tuesday, and very luckily I found this one lurking inside Mr. Filch's filing cabinet. It's the nearest we've got to a real Dementor. The boggart will turn into a Dementor when he sees you, so we'll be able to practice on him. I can store him in my office when we're not using him. There's a cupboard under my desk that he'll like." "Okay," said Harry, trying to sound as though he wasn't apprehensive at all, and merely glad that Lupin had found such a good substitute for a real Dementor. "So," said Professor Lupin, as he had taken out his own wand and indicated to Harry that he should do the same, "the spell I'm going to try and teach you is a highly advanced magic, Harry, well beyond ordinary wizarding level. It is called the Patronus charm." "How does it work?" said Harry nervously. "Well, when it works correctly, it conjures up a Patronus," said Lupin, "which is a kind of anti-Dementor, a guardian which acts as a shield between you and the Dementor." Harry had a sudden vision of himself crouching behind a Hagrid-sized figure holding a large club. Professor Lupin continued, "The Patronus is a kind of positive force, a projection of the very things the Dementor feeds upon. Hope, happiness, the desire to survive. But it cannot feel despair as real humans can, so the Dementors can't hurt it. But I must warn you, Harry, that the charm might be too advanced for you. Many qualified wizards have difficulty with it." "What does a Patronus look like?" said Harry curiously. "Each one is unique to the wizard who conjures it." Okay, I need to change my glasses. I'm trying to wear these to read, and it's hurting my face. Oh, much better. Much better. All right. Each one is unique to the wizard who conjures it. "And how do you conjure it?" "Well, with an incantation, which will work only if you are concentrating with all your might on a single, very happy memory." Harry cast about for a happy memory. Certainly nothing that had happened to him at the Dursleys was going to do. Finally, he settled on the moment when he had first ridden a broomstick. "Right," he said, trying to recall as exactly as possible the wonderful soaring sensation in his stomach. "The incantation is..." Lupin cleared his throat. "Expecto Patronum." "Expecto Patronum," Harry repeated under his breath. "Expecto Patronum. Concentrating hard on your happy memory?" "Oh, yeah," said Harry, quickly forcing his thoughts back to the first broom ride. "Expecto Patronum. Sorry, Expecto Patronum. Expecto Patronum." Something whooshed suddenly out of the end of his wand. It looked like a wisp of silvery gas. "Did you see that?" said Harry excitedly. "Something happened." "Very good," said Lupin, smiling. "Right then. Ready to try it on a Dementor?" "Yes," said Harry, gripping his wand very tightly and moving into the middle of the deserted classroom. He tried to keep his mind on flying, but something else kept intruding. Any second now, he might hear his mother again. But he shouldn't think that, or he wouldn't hear her again. Or would he hear her again? And he didn't want... Did he? Grasped the lid of the packing case and pulled. A Dementor rose slowly from the box, its hooded face turned towards Harry, one glistening, scabbed hand gripping its cloak. The lamps around the classroom flickered and went out. The Dementor stepped from the box and started to sweep silently towards Harry, drawing a deep, rattling breath. A wave of piercing cold broke over him. "Expecto Patronum!" Harry yelled. "Expecto Patronum! Expecto—" But the classroom and the Dementor were dissolving. Harry was falling again through thick white fog, and his mother's voice was louder than ever, echoing inside his head. "Not Harry! Not Harry! Please, I'll do anything!" "Stand aside! Stand aside, girl!" "Harry!" Harry jerked back to life. He was lying flat on his back on the floor. The classroom lamps were alight again. He didn't have to ask what had happened. "Sorry," he muttered, sitting up and feeling cold sweat trickling down behind his glasses. "Are you all right?" said Lupin. "Yes." Harry pulled himself up onto one of the desks and leaned against it. "Hello, Justin." "Here," Lupin handed him a chocolate frog. "Eat this before we try again. I didn't expect you to do it the first time. In fact, I would have been astounded if you had." "It's getting worse," Harry muttered, biting the frog's head off. "I could hear her louder this time, and him, Voldemort." Lupin looked paler than usual. "Harry, if you don't want to continue, I will more than understand." "I do," said Harry fiercely, stuffing the rest of the chocolate frog in his mouth. "I've got to. What if the Dementors turn up at our match against Ravenclaw? I can't afford to fall off again. If we lose this game, we've lost the Quidditch Cup." "All right then," said Lupin. "You might want to select another memory. A happy memory. I mean, to concentrate on. That one didn't seem to be strong enough." Harry thought hard and decided his feelings when Gryffindor had won the house championship last year would definitely qualify as very happy. He gripped his wand tightly again and took up his position in the middle of the classroom. "Ready?" said Lupin, gripping the box lid. "Ready," said Harry, trying hard to fill his head with happy thoughts about Gryffindor winning, and not dark thoughts about what was going to happen when the box opened. "Go!" said Lupin, pulling off the lid. The room went icy and cold and dark once more. The Dementor glided forward, drawing its rattling breath. One rotting hand was extending towards Harry. "Expecto Patronum!" Harry yelled. "Expecto Patronum! Expecto White fog obscured his senses. Big, blurred shapes were moving around him. Then came a new voice. A man's voice, shouting, panicking. "Lily, take Harry and go! It's him! Go, run! I'll hold him off!" The sounds of someone stumbling from a room, a door bursting open, a cackle of high-pitched laughter. "Harry! Harry! Wake up!" Lupin was tapping Harry hard on the face. This time it was a minute before Harry understood why he was lying on a dusty classroom floor. "I heard my dad," Harry mumbled. "That's the first time I've ever heard him. He tried to take on Voldemort himself, to give my mom time to run for it." Harry suddenly realized that there were tears in his face mingling with the sweat. He bent his face low as possible, wiping them off on his robes, pretending to do up his shoelace so that Lupin wouldn't see. You heard James?" said Lupin in a strange voice. "Yeah." Face dry, Harry looked up. "What? You didn't know my dad, did you?" I did, as a matter of fact," said Lupin. "We were friends at Hogwarts. Listen, Harry, perhaps we should leave it here for tonight. This charm is ridiculously advanced. I shouldn't have suggested putting you through this." "No," said Harry. He got up again. "I'll have one more go. I'm not thinking of happy enough things. That's what it is. Hang on." He racked his brain. A really, really happy memory. One that he could turn into a good, strong Patronus. The moment when they first found out The moment when he'd first found out he was a wizard and would be leaving the Dursleys for Hogwarts. If that wasn't a happy memory, he didn't know what was. Concentrating very hard on how he felt when he realized he'd be leaving Privet Drive, Harry got to his feet and faced the packing case once more. "Ready?" said Lupin, who looked as though he was doing this against his better judgment. "Concentrating hard? All right, go!" He pulled off the lid of the case for the third time, and the Dementor rose out of it. The room fell cold and dark. "Expecto Patronum!" Harry bellowed. "Expecto Patronum! Expecto Patronum!" The screaming inside Harry's head had started again, except this time it sounded as though it was coming from a badly tuned radio. Softer and louder and softer again. He could see the Dementor. It had halted, and then a huge, silvery shadow came bursting out of the end of Harry's wand to hover between him and the Dementor. And though Harry's legs felt like water, he was still on his feet, though for how much longer he wasn't sure. "Ridiculous!" shouted Lupin, springing forward. There was a loud crack, and Harry's cloudy Patronus vanished along with the Dementor. He sank into a chair, feeling as exhausted as he'd felt as if he'd just run a mile, his legs shaking. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Professor Lupin forcing the boggart back into the packing case with his wand. It had turned into a silvery orb again. "Excellent!" said Lupin, striding over to where Harry sat. "Excellent, Harry! That was definitely a start." "Whew. Can we have another go? Just one more." "Not now," said Lupin firmly. "You've had enough for one night. Here." He handed Harry a large bar of Honeyduke's best chocolate. "Eat the lot, or Madame Pomfrey will be after my blood. So, same time next week?" "Okay," said Harry. He took the bite of chocolate and watched Lupin extinguishing the lamps that had rekindled with the disappearance of the Dementor. A thought just occurred to him. "Professor Lupin," he said, "if you knew my dad, you must have known Sirius Black as well." Lupin turned very quickly. "What gives you that idea?" he said sharply. "Nothing. I mean, you just knew they were friends at Hogwarts. I just knew they were friends at Hogwarts, too." Lupin's face relaxed. "Yes, I knew him," he said shortly, "or I thought I did. You'd better be off, Harry. It's getting late." Harry left the classroom, walking along the corridor and round a corner, and then took a detour behind a suit of armor and sank down in its plinth to finish his chocolate, wishing he hadn't mentioned Black, as Lupin was obviously not keen on the subject. Then Harry's thoughts wandered back to his mother and father. He felt drained and strangely empty, even though he was so full of chocolate. Terrible though it was to hear his parents' last moments replayed inside his head, those were the only times Harry had heard their voices since he was a very small child. But he would never be able to produce a proper Patronus if he half wanted to hear his parents again. "They're dead," he told himself sternly. "They're dead, and listening to echoes of them won't bring them back. You'd better get a grip on yourself if you want that Quidditch cup." He stood up, crammed the last bit of chocolate into his mouth, and headed back to Gryffindor Tower. Ravenclaw played Slytherin a week after the start of term. Slytherin won, though narrowly. According to Wood, this was good news for Gryffindor, who would take second place if they beat Ravenclaw too. He therefore increased the number of team practices to 5 a week. This meant that with Lupin's anti-Dementor class, which in themselves were more draining than 6 Quidditch practices, Harry had just 1 night a week to do all his homework. Even so, he wasn't showing the strain nearly as much as Hermione, whose immense workload finally seemed to be getting to her. Every night, without fail, Hermione was to be seen in a corner of the common room, several tables spread with books, arithmetic charts, rune dictionaries, diagrams of muggles lifting heavy objects, and file upon file of extensive notes. She barely spoke to anyone and snapped when she was interrupted. "How's she doing it?" Ron muttered to Harry one evening, as Harry sat finishing a nasty essay on undetectable potions for Snape. Harry looked up. Hermione was barely visible behind a tottering pile of books. Doing what? Getting to all her classes, Ron said. I heard her talking to Professor Vector. That's the arithmetic teacher. This morning. They were going on about yesterday's lesson, but Hermione couldn't have been there because she was with us in Care of Magical Creatures. And Ernie Macmillan told me she's never missed a Muggle Studies class, but half of them are at the same time as Divination, and she's never missed one of them either. Harry didn't have time to fathom the mystery of Hermione's impossible timetable at the moment. He really needed to get on with Snape's essay. 2 seconds later, however, he was interrupted again, this time by Wood. Bad news, Harry. I've just been to see Professor McGonagall about the firebolt. She got a bit shirty with me. Yes, that's what it says, shirty. Told me I'd got my priorities wrong. Seemed to think I cared more about winning the cup than I do about you staying alive. Just because I told her I didn't care if you threw off as long as you caught the snitch on it first. Wood shook his head in disbelief. Honestly, the way she was yelling at me, you'd think I said something terrible. Then I asked her how much longer she was going to keep it. He screwed up his face and imitated Professor McGonagall's severe voice. As long as necessary, Wood. I reckon it's time you order a new broom, Harry. There's an order form in the back of which broomstick. You can get a Nimbus 2001, like Malfoy's got. I'm not buying anything Malfoy thinks is good, said Harry flatly. January faded imperceptibly into February, with no change in the bitterly cold weather. The match against Ravenclaw was drawing nearer and nearer, but Harry still hadn't ordered a new broom. He was now asking Professor McGonagall for news of the firebolt after every transfiguration lesson. Ron stood hopefully at his shoulder. Hermione rushed past with her face averted. No, Potter, you can't have it back yet, Professor McGonagall told him for the 12th time, before he'd even opened his mouth. We've checked it for most of the usual curses, but Professor Flitwick believes the broom could be carrying a hurling hex. I shall tell you once we're finished checking it. Now, please stop badgering me. To make matters even worse, Harry's anti-Dementor lessons were not going nearly as well as he had hoped. Several sessions on, he was able to produce an indistinct silvery shadow every time the boggart Dementor approached him, but his Patronus was too feeble to drive the Dementor away. All it did was hover, like a semi-transparent cloud, draining Harry of energy as he fought to keep it there. Harry felt angry with himself, guilty about his secret desire to hear his parents' voices again. You're expecting too much of yourself, said Professor Lupin sternly in their 4th week of practice. For a 13-year-old wizard, even an indecent Patronus is a huge achievement. You aren't passing out anymore, are you? I thought a Patronus would charge the Dementors down or something, said Harry dispiritedly. Make them disappear. A true Patronus would do that, said Lupin. But you've achieved a great deal in a very short space of time. If the Dementors put in an appearance at your next Quidditch match, you'll be able to keep them at bay long enough to get back to the ground. You said it's harder with loads of them, said Harry. I have complete confidence in you, said Lupin, smiling. Here, you've earned a drink, something from the 3 broomsticks. You won't have tried it before. He pulled 2 bottles out of his briefcase. Butterbeer, said Harry without thinking. Yeah, I like that stuff. Lupin raised an eyebrow. Oh, Ron and Hermione brought me some back from Hogsmeade, Harry lied quickly. I see, said Lupin, though he still looked slightly suspicious. Well, let's drink to a Gryffindor victory against Ravenclaw. Not that I'm supposed to take sides as a teacher, he added hastily. They drank the butterbeer in silence until Harry voiced something he'd been wondering for a while. What's under a Dementor's hood? Lupin lowered his bottle thoughtfully. Huh. Well, the only people who really know are in no condition to tell us. You see, the Dementor only lowers its hood to use its last and worst weapon. They call it the Dementor's kiss, said Lupin with a slightly twisted smile. It's what Dementors do to those they wish to destroy utterly. I suppose there must be some kind of mouth under there, because they clamp their jaws onto the mouth of the victim and suck his soul out. Harry accidentally spit out a bit of butterbeer. What? They kill? Oh no, said Lupin. Much worse than that. You can exist without your soul, you know, as long as your brain and heart are still working. But you'll have no sense of self anymore, no memory, no anything. There's no chance at all of recovery. You'll just exist as an empty shell, and your soul is gone forever, lost. Lupin drank a little more butterbeer and said, Sorry. It's the fate that awaits Sirius Black. It was in the Daily Prophet this morning. The Ministry have given the Dementors permission to perform it if they find him. Harry sat stunned for a moment at the idea of someone having their soul sucked out through their mouth, and then he thought of Black. He deserves it, he said suddenly. You think so? Said Lupin lightly. Do you really think anyone deserves that? Yes, said Harry defiantly. For some things. He would have liked to have told Lupin about the conversation he'd overheard about Black and the three broomsticks, about Black betraying his mother and father. But it would have involved revealing that he'd gone to Hogsmeade without permission, and he knew Lupin wouldn't be very impressed by that. I'm sorry I keep yawning. I've been awake since 6 o'clock this morning. I had to feed the horses this morning. God, this tastes so good. Okay. So he finished the butterbeer, thanked Lupin, and left for History of Magic. Harry half wished that he hadn't asked what was under a Dementor's hood. The answer had been so horrible, and he was so lost in unpleasant thoughts of what it would feel like to have your soul sucked out of you, that he walked headlong into Professor McGonagall halfway up the stairs. Do watch where you're going, Potter. Sorry, Professor. I've just been looking for you in the Gryffindor common room. Well, here it is. We've done everything we could think of, and there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with it at all. You've got a good friend somewhere, Potter. Harry's jaw dropped. She was holding out his firebolt. It looked as magnificent as ever. I can have it back? Harry said weakly. Seriously? Seriously, said Professor McGonagall, and she was actually smiling. I dare say you'll need to get the feel of it before Saturday's match, won't you? And Potter, do try and win, won't you? Or we'll be out of the running for the 8th year in a row, as Professor Snape was kind enough to remind me only last night. Speechless, Harry carried the firebolt back upstairs towards Gryffindor Tower. As he turned a corner, he saw Ron dashing towards him, grinning from ear to ear. All I can see when I look in here is I need to dye my hair again. She gave it to you? Excellent! Listen, can I have a go on it? Tomorrow? Yeah, anything, said Harry, his heart lighter than it had been in a month. You know what? We should make up with Hermione. She was only trying to help. Yeah, all right, said Ron. She's in the common room now, working, for a change. They turned into the corridor of Gryffindor Tower and saw Neville Longbottom pleading with Sir Gadigan, who seemed to be refusing him entrance. I wrote them down, Neville was saying tearfully, but I must have dropped them somewhere. A likely tale, roared Sir Cadogan, then spotting Harry and Ron. Oh, good evening, my fine young men. Come clap this loon in irons. He's trying to force entry into the chambers within. Oh, shut up, said Ron, as he and Harry drew level with Neville. I've lost the passwords, Neville told them miserably. I made him tell me what passwords he was going to use this week because he kept changing them, and now I don't know what I've done with them. Odds bodkins, said Harry to Sir Cadogan, who looked extremely disappointed, and reluctantly swung forward to let them into the common room. Hi, John. There was a sudden, excited murmur as every head turned, and the next moment Harry was surrounded by people exclaiming over his firebolt. Where'd you get it, Harry? Will you let me have a go? Have you ridden it yet, Harry? Ravenclaw will have no chance. They're all on clean sweep 7s. Can I just hold it, Harry? Yes, Harry, can I hold it? After 10 minutes or so, during which the firebolt was passed around and admired from every angle, the crowd dispersed, and Harry and Ron had a clear view of Hermione. The only person who hadn't rushed over to them, bent over her work and carefully avoiding their eyes. Harry and Ron approached her table at last, and she looked up. I've got it, said Harry, grinning at her and holding up the firebolt. See, Hermione, there wasn't anything wrong with it, said Ron. Well, there might have been, said Hermione. I mean, at least you now know that it's safe. Yeah, I suppose so, said Harry. I'd better put it upstairs. I'll take it, said Ron eagerly. I've got to give Scabbers his rat tonic. He took the firebolt, and, holding it as if it was made of glass, carried it away up the boys' staircase. Can I sit down, then? Harry asked Hermione. I suppose so, said Hermione, moving a great stack of parchment off a chair. Harry looked around at the cluttered table, at the long arithmancy essay on which the ink was still glistening, at the even longer Muggle Studies essay, Explain Why Muggles Need Electricity, and at the rune translation Hermione was now poring over. How are you getting through all this stuff? Harry asked her. Well, you know, working hard, said Hermione. Harry saw that she looked almost as tired as Lupin. Why don't you just drop a couple subjects? Harry asked, watching her lift books as she searched for her rune dictionary. I can't do that, said Hermione, looking scandalized. Arithmancy looks terrible, said Harry, picking up a very complicated-looking number chart. Oh, no, it's wonderful, said Hermione earnestly. It's my favorite subject. But exactly what was wonderful about arithmancy, Harry never found out. At that precise moment, a strangled yell echoed down the boys' staircase. The whole common room fell silent, staring, petrified at the entrance. There came hurried footsteps, growing louder and louder, and then Ron came leaping into view, dragging with him a bedsheet. Look! He bellowed, striding over to Hermione's table. Look! He yelled, shaking the sheets in her face. Ron, what? Scabbers! Look, Scabbers! Hermione was leaning away from Ron, looking utterly bewildered. Harry looked down at the sheet Ron was holding. There was something red on it. Something that looked horribly like... Blood! Ron yelled into the stunned silence. He's gone! And you know what was on the floor? No, said Hermione in a trembling voice. Ron threw something down into Hermione's runes translation. Hermione and Harry leaned forward. Laying on top of the weird spiky shapes were several long ginger cat hairs. I need to start a GoFundMe for costumes and makeup. That doesn't seem appropriate. People can just ask me for my address and start gifting me things. I'm not going to ask for a GoFundMe. If anybody wants to gift me items for Harry Potter, you're more than welcome to. I'll create an Amazon page, whatever. Angie donated this book. If you really want me to dress up, I will do my best. I don't have a witch's hat. It's not Halloween. I might be able to find one somewhere. I will cosplay Harry Potter every day, though. Would you like me to draw a scar on my forehead? Alright, next chapter. I like the ginger hair, John. God. Alright. Ooh, that was potent. Tastes like oranges. Chapter 13. Gryffindor versus Ravenclaw. I actually need to add to my Amazon wish list. It looked like the end of Ron and Hermione's friendship. Each was so angry with the other that Harry couldn't see how they'd ever make up. Ron was enraged that Hermione had never taken Crookshank's attempts to eat Scabbers seriously, hadn't bothered to keep a close enough watch on him, and was still trying to pretend that Crookshanks was innocent by suggesting Ron look for Scabbers under all the boys' beds. Hermione, meanwhile, maintained fiercely that Ron had no proof that Crookshanks had eaten Scabbers, that the ginger hairs might have been there since Christmas, and that Ron had been prejudiced against her cat ever since Crookshanks had landed on Ron's head at the magical menagerie. Personally, Harry was sure that Crookshanks had eaten Scabbers, and when he tried to point out to Hermione that the evidence had all pointed that way, she lost her temper with Harry, too. "Okay, side with Ron. I knew you would," she said shrilly. "First the firebolt, now Scabbers. Everything's my fault, isn't it? Just leave me alone, Harry. I've got a lot of work to do." Ron had taken the loss of his rat very hard indeed. "Come on, Ron. You were always saying how boring Scabbers was," said Fred bracingly. "And he's been off color for ages. He was wasting away. It was probably better for him to snuff it quickly. One swallow. He probably didn't feel a thing." "Fred," said Ginny indignantly. "All he did was eat and sleep, Ron. You said it yourself," said George. "He bit Goyle for us once," Ron said miserably. "Remember, Harry?" "Yeah, that's true," said Harry. "His finest hour," said Fred, unable to keep a straight face. "Let the scar on Goyle's finger stand as a lasting tribute to his memory." "Oh, come on, Ron. Get yourself down to Hogsmeade and buy a new rat. What's the point of moaning?" In a last-ditch attempt to cheer Ron up, Harry persuaded him to come along to the Gryffindor team's final practice before the Ravenclaw match, so that he could have a go on the firebolt after they'd finished. This did seem to take Ron's mind off Scabbers for a moment. "Brilliant! Can I try and shoot a few goals on it?" And they set off for the Quidditch pitch together. Madame Hooch, who was still overseeing Gryffindor practice to keep an eye on Harry, was just as impressed with the firebolt as everyone else had been. She took it in her hands before takeoff and gave them benefit of her professional opinion. "Look at the balance of it. If the Nimbus series had a fault, it's a slight list to the tail end. You often find they develop a drag after a few years. They've updated the handle, too. A bit slimmer than the clean sweeps. Reminds me of the old silver arrows. A pity they stopped making them. I learnt to fly on one. It's a very fine old broom it was, too." She continued in this vein for some time until Wood said, Madame Hooch, is it okay if Harry has the firebolt back? Only we need to practice." "Oh, right. Here you are then, Potter," said Madame Hooch. "I'll just sit over here with Weasley." She and Ron left the pitch to sit in the stadium, and the Gryffindor team gathered round Wood for his final instructions about tomorrow's match. "Harry, I've just found out who the Ravenclaws are playing as Seeker. It's Cho Chang. She's a 4th year, and she's pretty good. I really hope she wouldn't be fit. She's had some problems with injuries." Wood scowled his displeasure that Cho Chang had made a full recovery, and then said, "On the other hand, she rides a Comet 260, which is going to look like a joke next to the firebolt." He gave Harry's broom a look of fervent admiration and said, "All right, everyone, let's go." And at long last, Harry mounted his firebolt and kicked off from the ground. It was better than he'd ever dreamed. The firebolt turned with the slightest touch. It seemed to obey his slots rather than his grip. It sped across the pitch at such speed that the stadium turned into a green and gray blur. Harry turned it so sharply that Alicia Spinnet screamed. Then he went into a perfect controlled dive, brushing the grassy pitch with his toes before rising 30, 40, 50 feet in the air again. "Harry, I'm letting the snitch out," Wood called. Harry turned and raced a bludger toward the goalpost. He outstriped it easily, saw the snitch dart out from behind Wood, and within 10 seconds had caught it tightly in his hand. The team cheered madly. Harry let the snitch go again, gave it a minute's head start, and then tore after it, weaving in and out of the others. He spotted it lurking behind Katie Bell's knee, looped her easily, and caught it again. It was the best practice ever. The team, inspired by the presence of the firebolt in their midst, performed their best moves faultlessly, and by the time they hit the ground again, Wood didn't have a single criticism to make, because, as George Weasley pointed out, whoa. Which, as George Weasley pointed out, was a first. I can't see what's going to stop us tomorrow, said Wood. Not unless... Harry, you sorted your Dementor problem, haven't you? Yeah, said Harry, thinking of his feeble Patronus and wishing it was stronger. The Dementors won't turn up again, Oliver. The Dumbledore... That's an interesting sentence. The Dementors won't turn up again, Oliver. Dumbledore do his nut, said Fred confidently. Dumbledore do his nut. That is the word. Nice! Well, let's hope not, said Wood. Anyway, good work, everyone. Let's get back to the tower. Turn in early. I'm staying out for a bit. Ron wants to go on the firebolt, Harry told Wood, and while the rest of the team headed off to the changing rooms, Harry strode over to Ron, who vaulted the barrier to the stands and came to meet him. Madame Hooch had fallen asleep in her seat. Here you go, said Harry, handing Ron the firebolt. Ron, an expression of ecstasy on his face, mounted the broom and zoomed off into the gathering darkness while Harry walked around the edge of the pitch, watching him. Night had fallen before Madame Hooch awoke with a start, told Harry and Ron off for not waking her, and insisted they go on back to the castle. Harry shouldered the firebolt, and he and Ron walked out of the shadowy stadium, discussing the firebolt's superbly smooth action, its phenomenal acceleration, and its pinpoint turning. They were halfway towards the castle when Harry, glancing to his left, saw something that made his heart turn over. A pair of eyes, gleaming out of the darkness. Harry stopped dead, his heart banging against his ribs. "What's the matter?" said Ron. Harry pointed. Ron pulled out his wand and muttered, "Lumos." A beam of light fell across the grass, hit the bottom of a tree, and illuminated its branches. There, crouching amongst the budding leaves, was Crookshanks. "Get out of it!" Ron roared, and he stooped down and seized a stone lying on the grass, and before he could do anything, Crookshanks had vanished with one swish of his long ginger tail. "See," said Ron furiously, chucking the stone down again. "She's still letting him wander about wherever he wants, probably washing down Scabbers with a couple of birds now." Harry didn't say anything. He took a deep breath of relief. He'd been sure for a moment that those eyes had belonged to the Grim. They set off for the castle once more. Slightly ashamed of his moment of panic, Harry didn't say anything to Ron, nor did he look left or right until they reached the well-lit entrance hall. Harry went down to breakfast the next morning with the rest of the boys in his dormitory, all of whom seemed to think the firebolt deserved a sort of guard of honor. As Harry entered the great hall, heads turned in the direction of the firebolt, and there was a good deal of excited muttering. Harry saw with enormous satisfaction that the Slytherin team were all looking thunderstruck. "Do you see his face?" said Ron gleefully, looking back at Malfoy. "He can't believe it. This is brilliant." Wood, too, was basking in the reflected glory of the firebolt. "Put it down, Harry," he said, laying the broom in the middle of the table and carefully turning it so its name faced upwards. People from the Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff tables were soon coming over to look. Cedric Diggory came over to congratulate Harry on having acquired such a superb replacement for his Nimbus, and Percy Ravenclaw's girlfriend, Penelope Clearwater, asked if she could actually hold the firebolt. Now, Penny, no sabotage," said Percy heartily as she examined the firebolt closely. Penelope and I have got a bet on," he told the team. 10 galleons on the outcome of the match." Penelope put the firebolt down again, thanked Harry, and went back to her table. "Harry, make sure you win," said Percy with an urgent whisper. "I haven't got 10 galleons. Yes, I'm coming, Penny." And he bustled off to join her for a piece of toast. "Sure you can manage that broom, Potter?" came a cold, drawling voice. Draco Malfoy had arrived for a closer look, Crabbe and Goyle right behind him. "Yeah, I reckon so," said Harry casually. Got plenty of special features, hasn't it? Said Malfoy, eyes glittering maliciously. Shame it doesn't come with a parachute, in case you get too near a Dementor. Crabbe and Goyle snickered. Pity you can't attach an extra arm to yours, Malfoy, said Harry. Then it could catch the snitch for you. The Gryffindor team laughed loudly. Malfoy's pale eyes narrowed, and he stalked away. They watched him rejoin the rest of the Slytherin team, who put their heads together, no doubt asking Malfoy whether Harry's broom really was a firebolt. At 11:15, the Gryffindor team set off for the changing rooms. The weather couldn't have been more different from their first match against Hufflepuff. It was a cool, gray day with a very light breeze. There would be no visibility problems this time, and Harry, though nervous, was starting to feel the excitement only a Quidditch match could bring. They could hear the rest of the school moving into the stadium beyond. Harry took off his black school robes, removed his wand from his pocket, and stuck it inside the t-shirt he was going to wear under his Quidditch robes. He really hoped he wouldn't need it. He wondered suddenly whether Professor Lupin was in the crowds, watching. You know what we've got to do, said Wood, as they prepared to leave the changing room. If we lose this match, we're out of the running. Just fly like you did in practice yesterday, and we'll be okay. They walked out onto the pitch to tumultuous applause. The Ravenclaw team, dressed in blue, were already standing in the middle of the pitch. Their seeker, Cho Chang, was the only girl on their team. She was shorter than Harry by about a head, and Harry couldn't notice, nervous as he was, that she was extremely pretty. She smiled at Harry as the team faced each other behind their captains, and he felt a slight jolt in the region of his stomach that he didn't think had anything to do with the nerves. Wood, Davies, shake hands, Madam Hooch said briskly, and Wood shook hands with the Ravenclaw captain. Mount your brooms, on my whistle, 3, 2, 1. Harry kicked off into the air, and the firebolt zoomed higher and faster than any other brooms. He soared around the stadium and began squinting around for the snitch, listening all the while to the commentary, which was being provided by the Weasley twins' friend, Lee Jordan. All right, they're off, and the big excitement this match is the firebolt, which Harry Potter is flying for Gryffindor. According to which broomsticks, the firebolt's going to be the broom of choice for the national teams at this year's World Championship. George, would you mind telling us what's going on with the match? Interrupted Professor McGonagall's voice. All right, you are, Professor. Just giving a bit of background information, the firebolt, incidentally, has a built-in auto brake and Jordan. Okay. Gryffindor in possession. Katie Bell of Gryffindor heading for goal. Harry streaked past Katie in the opposite direction, gazing around for a glint of gold and noticing that Cho Chang was tailing him closely. She was undoubtedly a very good flyer. She kept cutting across him, forcing him to change direction. Show her your acceleration, Harry, Fred yelled as he whooshed past in pursuit of a bludger that was aiming for Alicia. Harry urged the firebolt forward as they rounded the Ravenclaw goalpost, and Cho fell behind. Just as Katie succeeded on scoring the first goal of the match, the Gryffindor end of the pitch went wild. He saw it. The snitch was close to the ground, flitting near one of the barriers. Harry dived. Cho saw what he was doing and tore after him. Harry was speeding up, excitement flooding him. Diving was his specialty. He was 10 feet away, and then a bludger, hit by one of the Ravenclaw beaters, came pelting out of nowhere. Harry veered off course, avoiding it by an inch. And in those few crucial seconds, the snitch had vanished. Harry Potter, with the fancy stick of his firebolt. Pretty Cho Chang. There was a great ooh of disappointment from the Gryffindor supporters, but much applause for their beater from the Ravenclaw end. George Weasley vented his feelings by hitting the second bludger directly at the offending beater, who was forced to roll right over in midair to avoid it. Nice. Gryffindor leads by 80 points to 0. Look at that firebolt go! Potter's really putting it through its paces now. See it turn. Chang's comet is no match for it. The firebolt's precise balance is really noticeable in those long... Jordan! Are you being paid to advertise firebolts? Get on with the commentary! Ravenclaw were pulling back. They had now scored 3 goals, which put Gryffindor only 50 points ahead. If Cho got the snitch before him, Ravenclaw would win. Harry dropped lower, nearly avoiding a Ravenclaw chaser, scanning the pitch frantically. A glint of gold, a flutter of tiny wings. The snitch was circling the Gryffindor goalpost. Harry accelerated, his eyes fixed on the speck of gold ahead. But the next second, Cho had appeared out of thin air, blocking him. "Harry, this is no time to be a gentleman!" Wood roared as Harry swerved to avoid a collision. "Knock her off your broom if you have to!" Harry turned and caught sight of Cho. She was grinning. The snitch had vanished again. Harry turned his firebolt upwards and was soon 20 feet above the game. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Cho follow him. She decided to mark him rather than search for the snitch herself. Right then, if she wanted to tail him, she'd have to take the consequences. He dived again, and Cho, thinking he'd seen the snitch, tried to follow. Harry pulled out of the dive very sharply, and she hurtled downward. He rose fast as a bullet once more, and then saw it, for the 3rd time. The snitch was glittering way above the pitch on the Ravenclaw end. He accelerated. So many feet below, so did Cho. He was winning, gaining the snitch with every second, and then... "Oh!" screamed Cho, pointing. Distracted, Harry looked down. 3 Dementors, 3 tall, black, hooded Dementors were looking up at him. He didn't stop to think. Plunging a hand down the neck of his robes, he whipped out his wand and roared, "Expecto Patronum!" Something silver-white, something enormous, erupted from the end of his wand. He knew it had shot directly at the Dementors, but didn't pause to watch. His mind still miraculously clear, he looked ahead. He was nearly there. He stretched out his hand, still grasping his wand, and just managed to close his fingers around the small, struggling snitch. Madame Hooch's whistle sounded. Harry turned around in midair and saw 6 scarlet blurs bearing down on him. The next moment, the whole team were hugging him so hard he was nearly pulled off his broom. Down below, he could hear the roars of Gryffindors in the crowd. "That's my boy!" Wood kept yelling. Alicia, Angelina, and Katie all kissed Harry, and Fred had him in a grip so tight Harry felt as though his head would come off. In complete disarray, the team managed to make its way back to the ground. Harry got off his broom and looked up to see a gaggle of Gryffindor supporters sprinting onto the pitch, Ron in the lead. Before he knew it, he had been engulfed by the cheering crowd. "Yes!" Ron yelled, shaking Harry's arm in the air. "Yes! Yes! Well done, Harry," said Percy, looking delighted. 10 galleons to me! Must find Penelope. Excuse me. Hi, Daddy. My dad really is watching, for anybody who just interpreted that oddly. "Good on you, Harry," roared Seamus Finnegan. "Really brilliant," boomed Hagrid over the heads of the milling Gryffindors. "That was quite some Patronus," said a voice in Harry's ear. Harry turned around to see Professor Lupin, who looked both shaken and pleased. "The Dementors didn't affect me at all," said Harry. "I didn't feel a thing." That would be because they weren't Dementors," said Professor Lupin. "Come and see." He led Harry out of the crowd until they were able to see the edge of the pitch. "You gave Mr. Malfoy quite a fright," said Lupin. Harry stared. Laying in a crumpled heap on the ground were Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle, and Marcus Flint, the Slytherin team captain, all struggling to remove themselves from long, black, hooded robes. It looked as though Malfoy had been standing on Goyle's shoulders. Standing over them, with an expression of utmost fury on her face, was Professor McGonagall. "An unworthy trick," she was shouting. "A low and cowardly attempt to sabotage the Gryffindor Seeker. Detention for all of you, and 50 points from Slytherin. I shall be speaking to Professor Dumbledore about this, make no mistake. Ah, here he comes now." If anything could have set the seal on Gryffindor's victory, it was this. Ron, who had fought his way through to Harry's side, doubled over with laughter as they watched Malfoy fighting to extract himself from the robe. Goyle's head still stuck inside it. "Come on, Harry," said George, fighting his way over. "Party! Gryffindor common room, now!" "Right," said Harry, and feeling happier than he had done in ages, he and the rest of the team led the way, still in their scarlet robes, out of the stadium and back up to the castle. It felt as though they had already won the Quidditch Cup. The party went on all day and well into the night. Fred and George Weasley disappeared for a couple of hours and returned with armfuls of bottles of butterbeer, pumpkin fizz, and several bags of Honeydukes sweets. "How did you do that?" squealed Angelina Johnson, as George started throwing peppermint toads into the crowd. "Oh, with a little help from Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs," Fred muttered in Harry's ear. Only one person wasn't joining them in the festivities. Hermione, incredibly, was sitting in a corner, attempting to read an enormous book entitled Home Life and Social Habits of British Muggles. Harry broke away from the table when Fred and George had started juggling butterbeer bottles and went over to her. "Did you even come to the match?" he asked her. "Of course I did," said Hermione in a strangely high-pitched voice, not looking up. "And I'm very glad we won, and I think you did very well, but I need to read this by Monday." "Come on, Hermione. Come and have some food," Harry said, looking over at Ron and wondering whether he was in a good enough mood to bury the hatchet. "I can't, Harry. I've still got 422 pages to go," said Hermione, now sounding slightly hysterical. "Anyway," she glanced over at Ron too, "he wouldn't want me to join in." There was no arguing with this, as Ron chose that moment to say loudly, "If Scabbers hadn't just been eaten, he could have gotten some of these fudge flies. He used to really like them." Hermione burst into tears. Before Harry could say or do anything, she had tucked an enormous book under her arm and, still sobbing, ran towards the staircase to the girls' dormitory and out of sight. "Can't you give her a break?" Harry asked Ron quietly. "No," said Ron flatly. "If she just acted like she was sorry, but she'd never admit she's wrong, she's still acting like Scabbers has gone on holiday or something." The Gryffindor party only ended when Professor McGonagall turned up in her tartan dressing gown and hairnet at 1 a.m. to insist that they all went to bed. Harry and Ron climbed the stairs to their dormitory, still discussing the match. At last, exhausted, Harry climbed into bed, twitched the hangings on his four-poster shut to block out a ray of moonlight, lay back, and felt himself almost instantly drift off to sleep. He had a very strange dream. He was walking through a forest, his firebolt over his shoulder, following something silvery and white. It was winding its way through the trees ahead, and he could only catch glimpses of it between the leaves. Anxious to catch up with it, he sped up, but as he moved faster, so did his quarry. Harry broke into a run, and ahead he heard hooves gathering speed. Now he was running flat out, and ahead he could hear galloping. He turned a corner into a clearing and... "Ah! No!" Harry woke as suddenly as though he'd been hit in the face. Disoriented in the total darkness, he fumbled for his hangings. He could hear movement around him, and Seamus Finnegan's voice from the other side of the room. "What's going on?" Harry thought he heard the dormitory door slam. At last, finding the divide in his curtains, he ripped them back, and at the same moment, Dean Thomas lit his lamp. Ron was sitting up in bed, the hangings torn from one side, looking with a look of utmost terror on his face. "Black! Sirius Black! With a knife!" "What?" "Here, just now! Slashed the curtains! Woke me up!" "Sure you weren't dreaming, Ron?" said Jean. "Look at the curtains! I tell you, he was here!" They all scrambled out of bed. Harry reached the dormitory door first, and they sprinted back down the staircase. Doors opened behind them. Sleepy voices called after them. "Who shouted? What are you doing?" The common room was lit by the glow of the dying fire, still littered with debris from the party. It was deserted. "Are you sure you weren't dreaming, Ron?" "I'm telling you, I saw him." "What's all this noise?" "Professor McGonagall told us to go to bed." A few of the girls had come down from their staircase, pulling on dressing gowns and yawning. Boys, too, were reappearing. "Excellent! Are we carrying on?" said Fred brightly. "Everyone back upstairs," said Percy, hurrying into the common room and pinning his head boy badge on his pajamas as he spoke. "Sirius Black," said Ron faintly, "in our dormitory with a knife, woke me up." The common room went very still. "Nonsense," said Percy, looking startled. "You've had too much to eat, Ron. Had a nightmare." "I'm telling you." "Now, really, enough's enough." Professor McGonagall was back. She slammed the portrait behind her as she entered the common room and stared furiously around. I'm delighted that Gryffindor won the match, but this is getting ridiculous. Percy, I expected better of you. I certainly didn't authorize this, Professor, said Percy, puffing himself up indignantly. I was just telling them all to get back to bed. My brother Ron here had a nightmare. It wasn't a nightmare, Ron yelled. Professor, I woke up and Sirius Black was standing over me, holding a knife. Professor McGonagall stared at him. Don't be ridiculous, Weasley. How could he possibly have got through the portrait hole? Ask him, said Ron, pointing a shaking finger at Sir Cadogan's picture. Ask him if he saw... Glaring suspiciously at Ron, Professor McGonagall pushed the portrait back open and went outside. The whole common room listened with bated breath. Sir Cadogan, did you let a man enter Gryffindor Tower? Certainly, good lady, cried Sir Cadogan. There was a stunned silence, both inside and outside the common room. You did? Said Professor McGonagall. But the passwords! He had 'em, said Sir Cadogan proudly. Had a whole week's worth, my lady. Read 'em off a little piece of paper. Professor McGonagall pulled herself back through the portrait hole to face the stunned crowd. She was white as chalk. Which person, she said, her voice shaking, which abysmally foolish person wrote down this week's passwords and left them lying around? There was utter silence, broken by the smallest of terrified squeaks. Neville Longbottom, trembling from head to fluffy-toed slippers, raised his hand slowly into the air. And that, my lovely viewers, is where we end this evening. Alrighty then. You guys have a lovely night. To anyone who is interested in it, I will reshare my Amazon wish list, I guess, and I will add some Harry Potter costumes to it, I guess, as requested. Anyway, have a lovely evening. I will see you tomorrow.